Okay, so we have a full model here, and you might be asking to yourself, what should we do with this? We have this really dense model. It's not really animatable at this point, so what can we do with it? And there are a few things we can do with it, one of which we're going to go over. So the first thing we can do with it is just to basically bake it down into a game character. So we could take this mesh, decimate it, which I've actually done here. If I turn on wireframes, you can see that. There we go. It's a bit dense, you can see, which is a little bit hard to deal with, but for making a final render, it's okay. All right, so we have this dense mesh, and it's kind of dense to use, so we could bake it down into a game character. So we decimate it, like you see here, to a level that still retains a lot of the detail, and then we can make a low poly mesh on top of this and project the detail of this into normal map and also into an ambient occlusion map, and we can use that to make a game character. The second thing we can do, if we want to make it a high poly animatable character, we can go ahead and actually convert this in 3D Studio Max by drawing on top of it and making a new mesh that has clean edges and that is a lot lighter and would deform really well. And now you might ask yourself, well, then why did we make it in ZBrush in the first place? And the answer is actually pretty simple. It's because the concepting in ZBrush is a lot faster, and if our goal was to make a game character, then we wouldn't need to do this step. We can skip this step entirely because you're going to be baking from high to low anyways. So making another high poly mesh isn't really important. But for film and stuff like that, you will need to make a new high poly mesh, and the ZBrush is really there just to help you create good solid forms. And it's actually, I think, is a bit quicker to make it in there and then kind of build on top of it here. That way you don't have to tweak a ton in ZBrush. I mean, sorry, excuse me, in 3D Studio Max. And the third thing we can do, which I'm going to cover right now, is we can just go ahead and pose it using transpose. And then we can import a decimated version of it, like you see here, into 3D Studio Max and make a final render. So I'm going to go ahead and take you over the basics of creating a comp is what we're going to do. We're not going to actually render our final image in 3D Studio Max. We're going to go ahead and render multiple passes and then stitch those together in Photoshop. And the reason I'm doing it this way is when you're creating a final image, it's just a lot faster since Photoshop is real time. It's not worth it to actually make the textures for it and render it all the way out when you can very, very, very easily just go ahead and render out a few different passes and then kind of massage them together into something that really works well. So you can see I have the model right here, and I'm going to go ahead and go over the settings a little bit. I am using vray for this, but mental ray or whatever render you want would be just as fine. So the first thing we're going to go over is the lighting setup. It's going a bit slow because the model is so dense again. But basically I have a camera. You can see that view over here. You can see where we're going to render from. And then I can go ahead and rotate around here. And you can see I have just a very basic light right here pointing at the character. Another one over here. So just lit from both sides. And then if we go ahead and go into the environment rollout, you can see I actually have an HDRI. So that's also contributing to the lighting of the scene, giving us an overall ambient view of the light. So I'll go ahead and show you that map right now. It's just a very simple HDRI. And all of these are going to contribute to the lighting. All right, and then for the render settings, I should go over these really quickly as well. I'm using vray, so I'm going to go over vray, but mental ray, for example, is pretty much the same thing. You just need to take care and notice what samples you're rendering at, and also if you're using indirect lighting as well. So we can go ahead and go into the render setup. All right, and you can see I'm using vray right now. Here's my resolution. In the vray settings, the only thing I really have set up is you just want to make sure you have an image sampling. And for this image, I just set my subdivisions to 1 at the minimum rate and 2 for the maximum rate. You'll want to play with those. I believe it defaults to -1, but you might get some aliased edges if you do that. So you can certainly go ahead and do that. Turn these down to like -20 if you're just testing images and you want to see, how the lighting will be. But for a final render, you really want to give it some more time to solve those edges. And then we're going to be using indirect illumination. And for the primary bounces, I'm using the irradiance map. I believe it does default to this. And for our secondary bounces, we're going to be using a light cache, and it defaults to brute force as a vray 2.0. But we're going to be using light cache because a lot of the discussions on the internet have concluded that the light cache is the best result, and it doesn't sacrifice a lot of time. So you'll get really good results, but it won't take as much time as some of the other settings. So for the irradiance map, we just leave it on high. This is for the final render, of course, and you want to show yourself the calculation phase just to so you can see what's going on, and so you're not surprised when it starts rendering the final image and you don't know why your lighting is completely crazy. And then for the light cache, I believe the subdivisions default to 1,000, but I just put them at 1,300 just to give it a little bit more calc time. And store direct light, that's default on. I leave that on. And show calculation phase again, just to see what's going on, so we can not be surprised by anything. And then for the materials, so we're gonna approach this from a standpoint of, if we were gonna texture this, how would we actually texture this? And I think the way that we would do that is we would say, okay, well, if we're gonna use car paint, which I kind of am gonna use, the first thing we would do is we would have a pure car paint layer, like the guy was brand new, and then in some areas we would damage that car paint, so it'll be a little bit, it won't be as reflective. And then if the guy gets really scratched, we'll go down to the metal. We'll devolve to where there's no paint. It's just the anisotropic metal that we would have. So so I have a car paint shader here, and it's really basic. It's a vray material and it's a blend material. So basically what it is it's two materials, and the base material here is basically like the base paint. If we go into it, you can see that the reflection isn't as high, and it reflects at a red color, and the glossiness is turned down a little bit because it's the underlayer of the paint, and the diffuse is red, which is what I wanted to use. And then we kind of have a shine material, which is really just the diffuse is red as well, and its reflection is pure white. So it's basically like the shellac material. And its reflective glossiness, which determines how sharp the reflection is very high. The subdivisions are at 12, and for this one the subdivisions are at 30. But you could get away easily with the undercoat of maybe doing 8 subdivisions. Keep in mind, the more subdivisions, the clearer the picture will be, but the longer time you'll take to render, and it'll take significantly more time to render 16 subdivisions than 8. Basically what we would do is we would apply all the materials we want. I kind of have a few metal materials over here that would just apply to different areas. And but I'm going to go over the car paint one, because really the only parameters you'll be changing are the diffuse color, the reflection and the reflection color, and the reflection glossiness, and at times the subdivisions. But we won't be doing anything with refraction. The BDRF we will be changing. I'll show you one of those materials in just a moment. So for one of the materials, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'll just kind of walk you through creating it. So I want to go ahead and grab my vray material. And I want the diffuse to be a little bit darker. We're going to make a kind of like a sort of brushed metal, but not exactly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the reflection and we're going to turn it up quite a bit. And see, these ones have they have environments, excuse me, so I want to put an environment on there so I can see what's going on. And I'll turn that down maybe to 0.8, so we get a kind of nice highlight on there. And so we have this kind of reflection here, and it's pretty splotchy, but what we want to do to give it that kind of brushed metal is, here, I'll leave it at blend for now. And anisotropy is basically the stretching of the reflection. I'm not sure technically what it is, but it's basically the stretching. You see, when I play with these two settings, it'll just kind of stretch everything. And so like negative 0.6, for example, would give us a nice stretched reflection. And then I can go ahead and maybe turn up the glossiness a bit, 0.9, maybe 0.85. And you just gotta keep messing with the settings to see what will really work. So we'll kind of use this for a metal. So this will be our very, very base layer of the metals that will be painted with car paint. And then we need to make a material for the inner paint, or the paint that hasn't quite chipped off as much as the others, but is still car paint. It's still car paint, but it's not this degraded. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take our car paint shader, and I always turn the colors down a little bit, or the values, excuse me, down. And you can get away with a lot lower subdivisions because of the. I'm going to turn down the reflection glossiness to maybe like 0.4. So with this kind of overall, maybe 0.6. So we get certainly less shiny result. And then for the shine, I'm also going to turn that down. The reflection is almost perfect right now, but I want to turn that down quite a bit, maybe to about there, and maybe 0.7, 0.6, somewhere around there. So it's not as reflective, so it kind of looks like the under. It doesn't look like it's a perfect car paint. It looks like it's been damaged a bit. And so what we would do is we would render one with the perfect car paint, and we would render one with this kind of dinged up car paint, but still car paint. And then we would render one with this kind of stretched, brushed metal right here. And one final setting that we're going to change before we actually start rendering is we're going to change the gamma if you haven't already. So basically what this is 3D Studio Max renders everything at a gamma of 1.0. But the problem is most monitors their viewing is at gamma 2.2. So a lot of the fall offs that you'll see will be a bit off, your gradient from black to white. So what we do to compensate for this is we enable gamma correction and we turn the gamma to 2.2. And what this tells 3dsmax is that, okay, we're viewing this scene from a monitor that has gamma 2.2. And so it will compensate for the difference. And you'll see everything is like, you'll see my materials are a bit washed out, or they appear washed out. And the reason for that is the gamma correction. Everything in 3D Studio Max is gamma corrected. I have my bitmap input set to 2.2, but some bitmaps that you want to use as textures will already be gamma corrected. So if they're at a gamma of 2.2 and they have an input of 2.2, it'll be clearly washed out. So you might want to keep this at 1.0, and you can change those gammas of those individual bitmaps when you load them into 3D Studio Max. So when you load a bitmap as a texture, it'll ask you for if you want a gamma correction on it, and you'll know whether or not it needs to be gamma corrected. It'll appear either really too dark, in which case it does need to be gamma corrected, or too bright, which it doesn't, or just right, and then you don't have to touch it. So mine's at 2.2, so every bitmap that comes in gets gamma corrected, but you don't have to do that. And then my output gamma is at 1.0 because I want everything to be exported and just at 1.0, because I can actually go ahead and just manipulate this in Photoshop, so it's not a big deal. And I'll show you how to do that as well. All right, so now at this point, what I would do is I would go ahead and apply all the materials I want to certain areas. So rubber materials to the rubber areas, car paint to basically everything else, and a few just kind of basic metal shaders. The one thing I would recommend is if you're new to shaders, you might want to just kind of play around with them. Most renderers will have reflection and refraction, diffuse, and BDRF as kind of your main parameters that you'll want to change. For example, if I can just go ahead and change my render real quick, I can show you the shader you'll be using for mental ray, just really quickly. So I'll go ahead and go to mental ray. And you see all these shaders become defunct because mental ray doesn't understand them. So what I'll go ahead and do is come over here, grab the Arc and Design material. That's what I would use if I were going to make this character in Mental Ray, which I have done a few characters in Mental Ray before, and it's a really good solution as well. It's just a bit slower in calculating lighting. So we have BDRF up here, and then we have our main material parameters. So it's kind of a glossy material right now, but you can turn up the roughness, and that kind of changes the overall lighting of it. And the reflection and the glossiness, you can turn these things up and down as well. And again, reflection is just how much it reflects its environment, and glossiness is the accuracy of that reflection, or kind of the sharpness of it. And you have set things such as samples and stuff like that, all the same stuff. And the anisotropy to tweak with the stretching of the reflections. So yeah, I would go ahead and render these out, and I'm going to actually skip this part and go over into Photoshop and show you the renderings that I've created and what I use to make the final render.